I guess to start, who knows who we are? Okay,
Well,
we got some hands, that's good. All right.
That was a risky question.
I do that because then it's worse when you like spend all kinds of time introducing yourself and they already know. So what I do is I make YouTube videos about flying lots of different types of airplanes. I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional pilot. Get a little feedback there. Do I need to talk louder?
Can you all hear that okay? Can you hear us?
A little
little more volume?
Okay, so I'm going to talk louder. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, got to project. So I make YouTube videos about flying lots of different types of airplanes. Actually, can you shoot my intro there? Yeah, thank you. And I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional pilot, but I've found the learning and the process of sharing the learning has been amazing for me to debrief my own flying, and that's kind of what my channel became about. It's called FlightChops. The goofy mustache is based on a joke, and now I'm stuck with it. So these two guys are pretty cool, different sides of the world.
Every time you pay us a compliment, feedback starts.
It's your fault.
It's a sign.
So we got Keith from PilotEdge, and we got Jason Miller, who's from the Finer Points of Flying. He's an amazing instructor. That was one of the guys that inspired me early on to really think about putting my stuff online and sharing. And Keith is from the sim world. So we're gonna this panel is gonna kind of create this arc. I'm new to sims. I've always loved them and wanted to get into them. It just wasn't something that I was into. I started flying in the 90s. And I just got my first ridiculous sim set up like 2 weeks ago. We were flying it for the first time.
Yep, absolutely.
So we're going to just talk about how that fits into real flying, and I'll let you guys pick it up.
All right. I'm kind of curious before we start, how many people here are have started their real world pilot training or are already pilots? Can't hear.
We lost our mics.
Check 1, 2. You guys got me, right?
Will you ask that question?
So the question.
Check 1, 2.
Check 1, 2.
I might just have to hold the thing.
Yeah.
This isn't
I
uncomfortable at
think
all.
Keith, you're asking the question, how many folks are actually in real world pilot training flying airplanes?
So we got some hands.
Wow, it's nearly the entire audience. That's great.
Which makes sense, because this talk is how to use simulators in real world training.
Well, it was the introduction to simulators, I think, is what home simming, but we're going to fit that context into
Right.
it.
And it was kind of interesting as we sat there, as we're sitting up here and talking about where things could go. It became pretty clear that there's a million different ways to attack the problem, and there are some different opinions on what sims are good for and not so good for. I think that might be an interesting place to start to kind of dive right into it. Is like the easy stuff is, if we talk about instrument training, for years now, decades now, everyone has accepted that sims are fantastic for certain types of instrument training. And as visual systems have gotten better and better, now you can transition to some of the primary training. But as you work into primary training, and this is what you and I were starting to hit on before, you start running into the limitations of what the simulator can and can't do from a stick and rudder perspective. So I'm kind of curious, I know we have different feelings on this, is what should you be practicing in a sim and what should you be trying to avoid?
Yeah, and it sounds like Keith and I were talking a little bit up front. We might have different views on this a little bit. But for me, it's been years and years and years since I've used simulators in any meaningful way. I fly pretty much every day. I'm flying with students, so I'm in airplanes a lot, and I get to see the results. I look at the student in the left seat, and I ask them often, are you using a flight simulator? Keith's product, PilotEdge, literally leaped out of the left seat and got on my radar because I would see students come in with 2 lessons, like second lesson, and we would get an absurd radio call from the tower. And in my world, I'd say, don't worry, I got it, I'll answer this one. Something like, I want you to cross overhead the field at or above 1,200, make right traffic for runway 30, you're number 2 behind a Cessna, clear to land, and the controller is going on, and I'll say, I got this call. And one day I had a student on his second lesson say, no, I got it, and answered the call, and I literally said, what in the world are you, how did you do that? And the answer was PilotEdge, so I can see as I look in the left seat how the simulator is working for the student. And this is where you and I differ a little bit, Keith, because often I'll see students do this strange thing on landing where they kind of flying the landing like a video game, and I recognize it now and I think, oh, you've been using the simulator to try to land. That's not the way I would use it or the way I would recommend using it. And that's what you're talking about with the stick and rudder stuff.
Yeah, I think we can agree the ATC side I think we can agree the ATC side is kind of a no-brainer. Whether you're using PilotEdge or VATSIM or IVAO, any of those networks are actually great for learning radio communications. Different networks have different pros and cons, but generally speaking, if you're doing any kind of ATC interaction in your simulator, I think we agree that's a great place to be. But where it gets a bit more controversial, as you said, is on the stick and rudder side. And I experienced what you're talking about. I had some bad habits when I went to go start my primary training in San Carlos, the same airport that you train at. I had been flying sims for 20 plus years before that, so I had just a litany of bad habits from the sim. And my instructor was very nervous about when we went for our first flight, like, how is this going to go? And he goes, let me tell you right now, you're going to screw up on these 2 or 3 things. And over-controlling and fixation on instruments, right? He goes, I don't want you staring at all the instruments. It's great that you know what they all do, but you shouldn't know what they do yet. That'll be more for instrument time later on. And so I heard those things, we went flying, and I promptly ignored every single thing he said, and still just kept staring at the instruments. He's like, Keith, we talked about this on the ground. You're wasting your money if you're going to keep staring at those instruments, because I'm not going to let you do that. And I said, all right, got it. So I'd look outside and just slowly back to the instruments again. And so like, damn it. So out he comes with a notepad and he just covered all of them up. And I'm like, okay. Now I have no choice but to look outside, but how do I know if I'm level? How do I know if we're climbing or descending? And he taught me to listen to the sounds of the airplane and feel, you can feel things in the butt of your seat, things that you don't actually pick up in the sim. But the short version is, we fixed that in about 6 to 7 minutes. So if you have an instructor who's very astute about those things and can either head them off at the pass or deal with it when it happens on the fly, as long as you're open to the fact that you might be wrong as a student, you can correct it pretty quick with the right instructor.
Yeah, and I can see that point. I think that what I want people to understand about flight simulators is when somebody comes in to learn to fly, they say, how does this process go? And I always tell them, flying the airplane is the easy part. Yeah. Flying the airplane is 25% of the problem. The rest of the problem is chart symbology, is radio communications, multitasking, procedural training, flow checks, checklists, regulations, airspace requirements. This is what's hard about becoming a pilot. So I just don't want people to skip that step. If you go to the airlines or if you go to the military, they're going to put you in a procedural trainer before they ever let you near a simulator, and they're going to put you in a simulator before they ever let you near an airplane. And so, I think it's fine to try to make those connections in the simulator, but I would do it at the very end. There's so much more value. And I know this is hard for sim pilots to hear. I know it because I tell this to my students. I say, here's how I want you to use it. I want you to put it on autopilot. I want you to practice your radio calls. I want you to practice your flow checks. I want to practice check. I give them a whole list of homework. The next time those students come in, they're flying the video game, and I say, darn it, you've been flying the simulator like it's a video game. So it's tempting. It's especially with all these beautiful displays and all the things you're talking about. It's very, very tempting to just try to fly that thing. But if you're really serious about using it as a tool for training, there's a lot of fruit on the tree before you get up to the branch of, I want to learn stick and rudder skills in this device.
So 2 things jumped out as you were talking about that. One is what you're describing as a very logical, linear training progression, where you start with the fundamentals, build them up, and then you kind of finish up with the fun stuff, putting it all together, doing the stick and rudder. Right. There's a lot of game design theory out there that says that linear training programs can be a real snooze fest for the students. They make sense on paper, but if it doesn't keep the people engaged, that can be a problem. And a lot of people start with using sims for entertainment. Mm-hmm. So if you come into it thinking, okay, I want to train as efficiently as possible to become a pilot, that progression is probably the most efficient way to do it, as you just described. But is it the most fun and engaging? And does it capture people who started by using sims for entertainment to begin with? So I think we're stuck with the fact that people are going to want to try and land the plane in the sim. But now they have to have the discipline to say, okay, what I've been doing at home may not work, and it comes back to saying, I need to kind of start from scratch, not on the airspace and chart symbology part, we've got that cold, but I may have to relearn how to land the plane properly and really listen to what the instructor's saying. So you have to kind of throw out what you learned through self-study and then learn how to land the real airplane, and now you can actually take that back to the sim. So I find that the way I land the airplane in the sim is identical to how I fly my real airplane. And then case in point, actually crosswind landings were a real problem for me in the real airplane. I was doing what my instructor told me, but I had absolutely no feel for what was going on in crosswind landings. So I said, you know, I know we're told not to use the sim for landings, especially cross control can be very inaccurate. So let me give this a try and see if I can understand what's going on. So I just cranked up the crosswind, I think 5 or 7 knots directly from the right, runway 30 at San Carlos. And I started playing with the cross control and really kind of nailed it. And I thought, okay, now I'm understanding what the rudder is for. Now I understand what the aileron's for. This sight picture makes sense. The control inputs make sense. The control loading on my feet was 100% wrong. And I knew that was the case. I know that it takes a certain amount of torque in a DA20 A1 to get the rudder to move when you're at 80 knots. On my CH rudder pedals that are 15 years old, God bless them, it takes about 1/10 of that amount of pressure to make the move. So do not rely on your muscle memory, because when you go to the airplane, nothing is going to happen. You're just not going to deflect the rudder at all. But as long as you're thinking about it in the case of more rudder and less rudder, that tended to work really well. And hey presto, I nailed the landings in the sim, then I came to do it in the real world. And my instructor, just like you were ready to take over on the comms, he was ready to take over when it was a gusty crosswind, and he had us on like a 3-mile straight in for runway 30. And he said, I want you to hold this slip the whole way in. He goes, normally we wouldn't slip for this long, but I want to see if you can hold this slip from all the way out. And I nailed that slip the whole way down. He goes, what changed? He goes, because you sucked at crosswind landings before. What changed? I said, X-plane, I think it was X-plane 9 in the stock 172.
Yeah.
So if you can separate out the deficiencies of the sim and focus on the fundamentals, I'm adamant that you can actually practice some primary training, some honest to God stick and rudder stuff in the sim.
Yeah, and you know, that may be true as long as you're not taking too much time up front to work on the 25% problem, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, like looking at Steve, right? So one of the things that you're now set up at home with a simulator. You're about to get ready on your instrument training, and we were talking over breakfast about whether or not the simulator, because you know, it's no secret how I feel. Really, I'm a don't fly the sim guy. Use the autopilot, work on the 75% problem before you get to the stuff that Keith is talking about, especially VFR. But I'm willing to be convinced that maybe instrument flying is worth actually grabbing the yoke and trying to figure out the relationship between the flight instruments and figure out how the attitude indicator works, and that's all fine. But my advice to Steve, to you, is that's still 25% of the problem. So what I don't want to see you do is get in the simulator and just say, yeah, I can fly this thing because, okay, you've now solved for one tiny portion of the problem. I'd rather see you go on autopilot, learn the procedures, learn how to brief approaches, program the radios. I think you have a great radio setup now at home.
Yeah, I got a pretty awesome panel set up.
No
You
comms.
guys can hear me? I'm on?
Yeah.
Check, 1, 2. I got a pretty solid panel from State Level Avionics. He set me up, John, over there. It was amazing setup with so you can hold that for me.
Yeah.
My issue is that I jump in and out of so many types. I need to learn the Garmin 430 physical unit with the knobs and buttons, and I can't stand using a mouse for that stuff, because in the real plane, as soon as you turn the knob the wrong way, when you got to quickly dial in, you're instantly flustered. So that to me is what I got the sim for, was the buttonology. I want the physicality of it. I want to match up what I'm going to do my instrument flight test in, so I got that set up for that reason. But it's interesting here, you guys have this debate, that's why I'm in the middle. Who here flies real airplanes? Pretty good numbers. Who here thinks it's easier to fly a real airplane than it is to fly sim? Right? So I find it so hard to trim. It's like,
that's my point.
In the sim, I'm like fighting with the trim because the feedback is not quite right. I mean, it's so hard to fly the airplane. Like I can fly a T6, and talking about instruments, like most of the instruments are broken in that thing. So
From the factory, that's how they come.
yeah.
Don't worry, sir, we've pre-broken it for you. It's
Yeah.
the high-end model.
So it's all feel, right? Like when I'm flying the T6, it is all feel. I know exactly how fast I'm going, and I know when I'm getting mushy. I know all of it because I feel it. So I can't imagine what you're talking about, learning how to crosswind land without that feel. So it's interesting to hear these two sides of the coin. I'm with Jason on the fact that stick and rudder, the sim is fun for that, but VR is cool for that. I feel like if you're trying to fly a pattern, you can really judge like when
Right.
you're in the pattern, but then I can't see the buttons that I'm
Yes.
trying to.
Well, and I think it's an issue of discipline, right? Like one of the experiences you told me about when you and Keith started, you said, you know, Keith said to me, forgive me, I'm relaying your experience, but you said something like, Keith said, yeah, pick a call sign for your airplane. You said, oh, I want to be Chops 1. And Keith, you drew a line.
Yeah.
You said, you know what, this is not about.
I
this is
threw my
not a
mic on the
game.
ground. I was
You're
so
not gonna be
angry.
Chops 1. You're going to be some end number, right? There's a certain amount of discipline required when you're operating in these simulated environments. And I think it's important to really think that
let's,
through.
Let's do a play-by-play about that first experience. So I'll get you a hole again.
It's a well-oiled machine up here, no big deal.
I spent so long wanting this type of setup, but not having the time or the energy to get it set up. I was inspired to renovate my office and put like a really solid purpose-built sim into the wall. And we flew it for the first time like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Because I was not going to come here and not have done it. And it was, you said there's going to be a moment where you think of this as a real plane, right? While we're setting it up. And this is like while we're dealing with driver configuration and setting up things. This is not a plane. This is a computer. I'm tripping over setup and configuration. And then we went through that joke of like the call sign needs to be, okay, real call sign, cool. And then we got FlightChops working on the iPad. I think when I keyed the mic and had someone answer me and give me a taxi clearance, I was like, wow. Like I think I say that, like that's awesome.
Right.
There's really a guy there waiting for me to get to the hold short line. And then I started taxiing and then I saw the airplane moving on the iPad. And I was so excited by that I was this guy for a second, filmmaker guy. I started filming the iPad. And then I taxied into the grass. and the airplane actually got stuck. And I'm like, oh no. And the controller's waiting for me. And at that moment, what you said kicked in. I'm like, I would not have done this in a real plane, like film my iPad and taxi into the grass. So at that moment, I started thinking of it as a plane. And that only took minutes. And then we did a departure and we did some formation flying and it felt very real in my office. And that was really cool, like to be dialing in the frequencies and playing with actual physical buttons. So I can see how, for me, using it as a procedural trainer, immersing myself into my workflow, like put your knee board where it goes, write your clearances down on a pencil, do it all in real time. Don't taxi into the grass because you're filming your lap.
Yeah.
I can see and I don't think that I would have treated it like a real plane if we didn't have PilotEdge hooked up with a controller waiting for me, knowing that if I sit here taking forever, the guy who just gave me clearance to get to the hold short line is gonna be like, where are you?
If you didn't have an ATC system, you would have started on the runway with the engine running. You would have hit the gas, you would have done a high performance takeoff, turned around and started doing loops and rolls over the airport. That's what most people would do in a sim.
Probably, yeah.
The whole idea of having to look at an airport diagram and process a taxi instruction, that has tremendous training value. If you can expose yourself to 100 different towered airports during your training, then when you go to fly at the 101st towered airport on a long distance cross country, it's no big deal. Whereas if you've really only flown out of San Carlos for the past year or so, then you get kind of nervous when it's not your home base. So to the extent you can expose yourself to different scenarios in the sim, that's huge. And I think your point about the technology getting in the way is a really, really big deal. If you find yourself constantly distracted because you can't do something in the sim, or the controls are crap, and you can't trim it worth a damn. If you're getting distracted by the technology and your immersion is in the toilet, you really need to fix that. You have to kind of step back and be objective and say, what is it about this process that is frustrating me right now? Because a well-configured sim it should feel like what you just described. It should feel like you're flying an airplane. For me and my sim at home, which is nothing fancy, it's a $66 set of flight controls, $100 rudder pedals, and about a $2,000 PC, and 4Flight, and 2 screens, one for the sim, one is not for the sim, it's for charts and stuff like that. That's all I need. And I know exactly what it's good for and what it's not good for, so I have a really pleasant sim experience every time. When I see people who have not kind of done their own analysis of whether their sim experience is working, and they're always, you say, hey, how'd that flight go? Oh, I had a couple problems with the sim, the frame rate wasn't right, something was weird with the plane, I couldn't trim it, the radio wasn't working quite right. I mean, they list all these things that are a complete distraction. So you have to be ruthless about that stuff. You got to get that stuff dialed in so that you can stop worrying about the technology. And for God's sake, stop changing settings in your sim, trying to get it to run better. Like get it dialed in and then do not play with it anymore. Focus on using it for the training.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I just want to underline that point that these guys are making, that from where I'm sitting in the right seat, somebody watching people spend thousands and thousands of dollars in real flight training, there's tremendous value to what Keith just said. Getting a taxi clearance, looking at a taxi diagram, and processing the route is arguably more important than being able to hold the taxi center line on the simulator. Now, work toward the center line on the simulator, but the real value there is the taxi diagram, the clearance, the briefing, the processing, the habit of doing that. That is going to save you thousands of dollars in flight training.
And I guess to that point also, talking about the cost of a sim, like I know you got your full motion Redbird sim that's all exciting, a lot of flight schools have those. I did a bunch of instrument training in them, and I got to the point where my instructor said, stop fighting with the trim, just put an autopilot on for a second, it'll auto trim for you. because trying to trim the red, like this is what are they worth, like $50,000-$60,000?
Keep going. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like what I got at home does everything I needed to do because I didn't want to try to trim the Redbird and I didn't want to land it. Every time we broke out of the clouds at minimums, I'm like, cool, bring me back to the FAF or whatever. I'm not gonna spend the next 3 minutes doing this, the rest of this approach. To me, that's a waste of my time with my instructor. I don't care how the Redbird lands.
Right.
And so really, it came down to getting a setup at home that had what I needed. So I think was it Real Sim Gear was the
430.
It's exactly like the real thing, man.
Right.
So
it's a pretty low cost investment because it is a hardware bezel with a HDMI connection, so a little LCD screen.
Yeah.
And X-Plane 11 is actually driving the Garmin display. So you're not buying a standalone piece of hardware that has a bunch of code and logic in it. It's just a relatively low cost piece of hardware that leverages what X-Plane already does relatively well. Now, this again is one of those things where do not get too obsessed on every screen of the avionics. You have to understand that some of these avionics have limitations. They're not exactly like the real world. So you will learn 80% of how to drive the Garmin properly, but you're going to have to understand when you get to the airplane, there's going to be a delta. A couple of things will be off. So setting radios, entering the flight plan, loading approaches, executing approaches, missed approaches, that all rocks. But if you want the VNAV mode, if you want to change the data fields, the X-Plane implementation is limited. But that doesn't mean it's negative training. You just have to learn when to cut it off and say, okay, I know that is different to the unit, so I'm just going to have to survive that.
yeah, I'm just trying to get to a point where I'm not, because I don't ever fly it, so I need to not be in the plane with my examiner and tripping over which knob gets me the page change versus which one gets me
Absolutely. Yeah, if they say clear direct to fix, you can get to this point with your real SimGear unit. You'll reach for the flight plan button, you'll turn the cursor, you'll hit direct enter, you'll see the CDI, and you'll look for what that desired track is, and you'll be in the turn in less than a second.
That's what I want to do, because I
seconds.
need to take as many things out of the muscle memory, or put them into the muscle memory bank, and take them out of the front cortex part of your brain. And
Absolutely.
Because that's what kills me in flight training. Anything that you can do in advance. So bringing it back to the T6, I hangar flew that airplane the weekend that I was getting checked out. The weather was not flyable for like the first day and a half. And I hangar flew that thing, and I sat in the hangar and mostly was freaking out because y'all know what a T6 is? Anyone doesn't know? Who doesn't know what a T6 is? Okay, a couple people.
Apparently I don't.
You did, yeah. Jason doesn't know those warbirds. Behold it. It's kind of the classic warbird trainer. So it's the big round engine at the front. It's sort of a Mustang trainer, 6,000-pound tail dragger, retractable gear, constant speed prop, supercharged radial engine. So there's a lot of complexity going on there. There's a lot you can do to blow it up. There's a lot you can do wrong. It also doesn't get the power quickly, so it's kind of like a jet almost in the sense that if you're low and slow on final, you can't just goose it to add power.
Oh.
I think it was partly because Mustangs, if you did that, it would flip you over and kill you with the Merlin engine. So it almost worked well in that sense because you learned to add power slowly. But all I'm getting to is that I sat there hangar flying this thing so that there would be no question that I knew exactly where everything is, because that cockpit you just get in and you keep getting in. There's so many knobs and buttons and dials, and it's like really scary in there. And I didn't want, so in the end it worked out that I had 2 days to sit there stressing out and sweating in this thing. Because my instructor said to me, like, I'm gonna be in the back when we're landing, you've got the time, I know you can do this, you're good at keeping the airplane straight, but if you really screw up a landing, like, we're going for a ride. I can't save a ground loop once it starts if you screw it up. So I'm here to be your coach, you're ready to fly this thing, but hangar flying it really got me to the point where I didn't get distracted by where's the gear, or where's the flap handle, or whatever, what I'm looking at, because it's really hard to know where your flap setting is, because it's this lever that is on, it's going down, and then you put it in the middle for lock and back up for up. So you have to like watch these fingers to know where the flaps are, because you can't see them. And I had to know exactly where to look quickly to get them exactly at 10 degrees and then get back to what I'm doing. So having a sim that lets me do that with muscle memory, reaching where I need to reach, turning the knob the way it needs to turn, pressing the button, that to me is invaluable. So I'm really excited that I've got that in my office now. I don't have to spend the money on a CFI, wasting time tripping over that stuff, getting flustered. Because there's this thing that happens in training where you fall down the flustered hill. Like as soon as you start tripping, you just start falling, and then it's like it's hilarious how you're off board. Like that's what I call it. It's like I often ask myself, am I still on board? Right. And there's times it's like, I'm not on board anymore. This lesson might as well be over. Because if you've tripped over enough things, you're done.
It's good to call it at that point too. And Hearing you guys talk about the Redbird simulators being tens and tens of thousands of dollars, I think there's an important thing, maybe this goes back to the point about discipline, but it may be important for everybody to remember the thing you said, Keith, about if you didn't have the ATC, you might take off and do a high performance thing and do a roll and do a hammerhead turn. So there's this temptation in a simulator to maybe use it like a game. And I think what there is to remember is if you're in the most hardcore place of discipline, like when I went for my ATP certificate, I'd already been teaching for 10 years. I don't have a lot of money. I'm a CFI, and I had to hire a plane that was $350 an hour and an instructor that was $150 an hour. So all of a sudden, I'm spending $500 an hour on flight training. Oof. My first 3 lessons with that guy at $150 an hour, we sat in front of a cardboard picture of the cockpit and the POH, and we just went through like 3 hours at a time. I paid him, $450 3 times in a row to read through each one of the checklists, but that saved me so much money. When I finally got out to the airplane and now I'm running this machine that's $350 an hour, the flights, I knew everything that was coming. So I think you kind of have this balance in your sim setup. If you're willing to be super disciplined and super hardcore, remember that the military and the airlines would start you on nothing more than a picture and a checklist. But that's really boring, and not everyone's willing to be that hardcore. So you're looking for some middle ground, right? Get some setup. You don't have to spend $60,000 on it. Wherever that line is for you, maybe the ATC thing is a huge component. If you can get ATC in there, if you can get some of the muscle memory Steve's talking about, then for the purposes of flight training, your investment is complete. And then just have the real POH, the real checklist, and treat it like a real flight. That's the most important part.
One thing that comes up fairly often with people who are transitioning into simming is they become obsessed with modeling their airplane and their avionics. And they think the value of the sim goes from 100 to literally 0 if it's not their panel with their paint job, their tail number. And so much of flying, as you said, is the stick and rudder is such a very small part of it. Whether you're in a 172 or an Archer in the sim, then the process of flying instruments or doing pattern work, the logic is identical, especially if the performance of the aircraft is in the same ballpark. So if you're flying 120 knot piston single, then go ahead and fly any 120 knot piston single in the sim. If you're happy to focus on generic airspace chart symbology, situational awareness, ATC interaction, briefing approaches, fundamentals of approaches, full approaches versus vectors to final, all of that stuff, it doesn't matter what type of airplane you're in. It's really only if you're trying to work on the flows. So what are my emergency procedures for a 172 versus a Piper Archer? Well, now we are talking about something slightly different. So if you can't find a Mooney 201, let's say flying an M20J in the real world, like a 1970s Mooney, and there isn't a really good one for the sim, don't discount the value of the sim. So maybe you won't be able to practice EPs, but there's like 1,000 other things you can practice really, really meaningfully. Mm-hmm. To the point with avionics, I know how to fly my Garmin 420 and my Lancer 360 really, really well. Therefore, when I fly in the sim, I genuinely don't care if the sim even has a Garmin GPS or not. I'll fly at slant uniform or slant alpha, right? Just the VOR and DME. Because for me, I'm there to practice course tracking and interception, energy management, and multitasking, and the ATC interaction. So I'm not there to practice avionics. So if you can, again, before you get too frustrated and write off the device because it's not your airplane, think about, okay, does it matter? What tasks can I practice with this device meaningfully? And that way you can put the frustration aside because you're not being constantly reminded of the deficiencies. One more thing I would add, if you have a choice between flying your airplane and flying a different airplane, I'll put it this way, if someone put out a Lancer 360 for X-Plane, there's a very strong chance I won't even buy it. I will not fly it because I will be hyper in tune to how my airplane performs. I know I should get 168 knots at about 8,000 feet, 9.7 gallons per hour, and heaven help that developer if it's doing 169 knots, right? And because I'm going to get distracted and go, oh, it's at 169, or God damn it, all right, brief the approach, blah, blah, blah. No, now it's at 170, this is a waste of time, Whereas I'll jump in a Baron. This is a twin. I have no idea how to fly a twin. I'll fly the Baron. I know damn well that this Baron in X-Plane is a full 35 knots slower than the real Baron, but it doesn't matter. So the addiction to having your airplane can actually be unhealthy because you're never going to get your airplane. And even if the numbers end up being right, Now you have this weird condition where the plane is right, but the controls are completely wrong.
Right.
The stick forces are completely wrong, because unless you spend $30,000 on a dynamic control loading unit, it's never going to feel exactly like the real airplane. So I think it's a fool's errand to practice trying to nail your airplane. I also think the obsession with your own home airspace is another thing that needs to go. People get absolutely hung up on, oh, I can't fly on this network if it's not my airport. Guess what? Aside from primary training, the last place you need to practice is your home airport. You've memorized all the frequencies, you know the taxi route. When they say runway 30 taxi via Alpha, you don't have to look at a chart. You've done that taxi 1,000 times. So I'd encourage you to fly somewhere else. Anyway, I've talked for a lot. So
No, that's okay. I just want to say there's
the
so
call.
much value in what you just said about knowing the learning objective. I don't want people to lose that. Like pretty much, everything Keith was just saying is what's the objective of the simulator session. And there isn't a flight lesson I would give or one I would participate in where we didn't know what the learning objective is. And as long as you've outlined your learning objectives, then everything falls into line behind it, like Keith is saying. I don't need to fly my plane. That's not my objective. I don't even need a GPS. So being hyper aware of what it is you're trying to learn in the simulator is going to keep you in focus.
That's a good point, actually. That inspired me to set up my sim as a twin. I got my multi, but I don't have access to a twin. So I set up my sim as a twin with that option with the throttles and the mixtures and the props. What I was most concerned about was having the physical 430 unit.
yeah.
Otherwise, once I've got the rating or finishing flight, I don't care to match any particular airplane.
Right.
So I'll fly a twin around and then work on that and do some single engine approaches and stuff like that and use it for what I won't be typically doing, because why try to replicate what you're typically doing? And yeah, you're right, you'll never get it. I guess we should throw it to questions. Is there anything we didn't hit?
I don't think
so. Let's hit questions,
10
I guess.
minutes per question.
Perfect.
Yep.
We got about 10 minutes, guys.
Okay, so Mike guys are going to find you, and they'll be the ones that choose, I guess. So yeah, there's a guy in the front here, but Mike guy is over there.
I got a question.
Okay, we
This
got
isn't
one
awkward
here.
at all.
So he'll get to you. He'll get to you.
Yep. All right, so this is Richard from Louisville.
I was just wondering, when did PilotEdge start? And Air Manager, I've heard about that. Any comments or thoughts?
I heard the first part of the question, when did it start? So PilotEdge started October 1st, 2011. And it's been operating 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for those that aren't aware, there are different ATC networks out there. And PilotEdge is, the way it's distinguished is that it's a subscription service. You pay for it. And we offer the ATC 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, covering the western half of the United States. There's about 85 towered airports. So the difference between that and other networks is when you go to fly on PilotEdge, you know that there will be a controller there or not. What was the second half of the question?
He wanted to know a little bit about Air Manager.
I couldn't hear that, I'm sorry. Oh, thoughts on what?
Software, Air Manager.
Air Manager?
Air Manager.
software, have you heard of it?
I'm not familiar with it.
All right, guys, over here we have Mike from Peoria.
Yeah, I'm just kind of starting down that road of trying to figure out, if I want to learn to fly and, how I want to do that. One of the ways that I'm doing sim, I'm doing X-Plane and I'm doing it in VR. Of course, you've got your touch controllers. It's hard because you can't see physical controls, so I'm not really using an actual flight yoke and rudders and all that. But I just wonder, what you guys think about the value of doing that in terms of muscle memory, where you don't have the physical components that you can feel and touch, but in terms of, you can look around in that cockpit and learn where things are, even though you're not grabbing them with your hands, versus using, physical controls or setting up a physical cockpit that might not match the plane that you're flying.
I think a lot of that for me is how diligent are you being about the procedures. Like, so if you have a POH for a Cessna 172, for example, and you've got a climb checklist, a cruise checklist, a descent checklist, and a before landing checklist, and let's say your learning objective for your simulator session is to develop good habitual use of checklists, right? Then as long as you are being disciplined and on each and every climb, regardless of whether or not you're flying the thing or it's on autopilot or whatever, if the objective is to get good at checklists, as long as you're kind of going through the motions and reading the checklist, I don't think it matters much if you're touching things or not. You're going to make a lot of progress toward meeting the objective of that session, right? So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on it.
I'm violently opposed to VR right now for the type of training that you're talking about. I hate to say it. VR is incredible. It will become the thing in the future. as you're able to manipulate the controls really efficiently. Right now, in a Cessna 172, when you want to go flick a switch, you don't shoot a laser at it, right? If that's how Cessna 172s works, we'd be golden, because that's how VR works right now. You're using a pointer to go on all the things that you need to manipulate. At least that's what I've seen so far. And it becomes distracting. Oh, that's interesting. The stuff that I've seen, they're not moving the pointer towards it. They're just shooting a light at it and are able to manipulate from a distance. I see. Gotcha. Even so, I think some of the detailed manipulation of some of the fine-grained controls, like the concentric knobs for a radio, you're going to learn these. You're going to love having that real sim gear. Nothing's better than having those concentric knobs that have 5 functions: big knob up, big knob down, little knob up, little knob down, and cursor.
Yeah,
Trying to do that in VR is a nightmare. So I'd rather dispense with the VR and have even just a mouse to be able to manipulate it, or physical hardware, because physical hardware is much faster.
VR, we did some formation. So Dave, my warbird buddy, who built he's the guy that checked me on the T6, and he's also the guy that built my PC. He's like this guy that crosses all the worlds. He's got a really cool VR setup, and we did some formation flying with one of his buddies in warbirds.
It's amazing for that.
Wow, dude, this is exactly what it's like. I'm looking at the plane, I'm playing, I'm adjusting throttle, I can tell when I'm in or out of position. So VR was amazing for that, because I didn't have to move my hands. It's what it's like in the real plane. You don't really look at the cockpit much in the real plane in formation. I mean, you're listening if something's going wrong, but you're not going to spend time looking at your instruments. You're glued to your lead.
It comes back to the task that's being trained. So VR excels for formation flying. It sucks for like checklist. How do you even bring the checklist into the sim? It's doable, but it does require a lot of technical knowledge and charts and things like that.
My feeling is, I would just argue that a little bit, saying that from where I'm sitting, it's consciousness about the checklist that's typically deficient. Like when I see pilots in the real world, in a real airplane, I have to remind them, what about your climb checks? Oh, right, I have to do a climb checklist. So it's just the habit, the ritual of it, the standard operating procedure. And that doesn't matter to me if it's VR or if it's a mouse or if it's a keyboard. Best case would be hardware, but if you can't have that, if the objective is to develop good habits, you can get it done in any of those environments.
So we got this one right here real quick,
I probably misunderstood something you said. My understanding is PilotEdge gives you experience with air traffic control and charts and all the technical aspects. And you had alluded earlier to the fact that flying a real airplane is a lot easier than flying a simulator, which I agree. How did it improve your stick and rudder skills, or did I misunderstand you?
So the question is, how did the simulator improve your stick and rudder skills fundamentally, right? That's what you're asking? PilotEdge. So I don't think, from my perspective, I've only begun, but I can already see that I don't think it applies at all to stick and rudder skills. PilotEdge is all about situational awareness. So
and it loads up your ability to multitask.
That's what I'm saying. So for me, I want to be more comfortable with ATC. I want to be more comfortable writing down my clearances. The things that trip me up in the plane is not flying it. It's when I get a big giant clearance and I'm like, and I'm quickly reaching for the, write it down, and then it's like, read it back. Okay, now get it in. That's what I care about, and
I have to agree.
Whatever you want to call that, situation awareness or being on board.
Well, there's so many. I mean, again, if the objective of the lesson is multitasking, the minute you put another human on the other end of the line, all of a sudden there's an urgency to respond to communications, which loads up your, what I call your processor. And like the guy said, like Jason said before, the
navigate, communicate.
That
so communicate comes last.
Yeah, communicate comes last. So if you're practicing that, or your ability to just process things. I mean, there's that joke about there's a time in instrument flying where I'll ask you what your name is and you say stand by, because you can't think about everything. It's thinking about everything at once that's part of the 75% problem, right? And flying the airplane is so task saturating that's a danger, I think. That's why I would say to you, great, learn how to fly the airplane, but do it last, because if you think to yourself, I'm going to learn how to fly the plane in this sim, and you just start flying it, you're already pinwheeling your processor. You're not going to have a lot of room to understand all the other stuff that's going on.
I would agree that it's not going to affect your stick and rudder. The only thing we might do is put you in positions which you wouldn't have put yourself into. So we might tell you to either extend your downwind, or we might say, hey, can you make a short approach? Because there's a King on a 4-mile final, and you're being the numbers in a 172 or a couple, say, hey, can you do a short approach? Maybe if you were practicing by yourself, you wouldn't have done the short approach. And so now you're actually looking out the window, pulling to idle, getting the flaps out, maybe slipping. So maybe you're getting to practice maneuvers you wouldn't have practiced as much, but that's almost a stretch. By and large, it's really not going to help your stick and rudder.
All right, guys, we got time for about 2 more questions.
Yep.
Hey, this is Tim. I'm brand new to this community. Mike Victor Yankee is my home airport. And, you know, I'm an ex-planer. I'm starting to make that transition towards, you know, basic equipment and, you know, just someone who's new to this community. Who are some of the, you know, walking around this expo, who are some of the key stakeholders that I should be talking to, say top 5, or, you know, just as I assess the options from an equipment standpoint?
I don't think it would be fair for us to pick out one particular
Yeah.
vendor here. There's some great stuff, and a lot of it's stuff I have never seen before, and I've been in this space for a while. It's not a massive show floor. You should go by every booth and then ask to see what it is they do and think about how much does it cost, what's the ROI going to be, and you know, does it work for the tasks that you're trying to train. So if you're a G1000 guy, you may be a candidate for buying a beautiful G1000 piece of hardware. Don't buy a G1000 thing if you're learning in a Garmin 430 or 530. So there's great flight controls, there's great avionics, there's great simulator manufacturers. I wouldn't want to pick out a single one necessarily, but there's really good stuff out there.
I think, yeah, the main thing is think about what you want to achieve, but also what is your setup at home. Like, I originally was going to just put a small setup on a desk beside my editing suite. Very quickly that all changed. So I'm editing the episode right now about what I went through to build the sim that inspired me to actually renovate my studio, and where I had a bunch of useless shelves, I ripped them out and built it into the walls so that it's kind of a pretty awesome purpose built. So when I pull up to it, I feel like I'm going to the office for a minute, like the airplane office, not my studio. And so make that decision for what your setup needs to be personally, because yeah, I'm new at it. I made the choice for real sim gear and stay level avionics to help me set up the system with the hardware, but it's going to have to be personal for what you want it to be.
All right, our last question is from Steven, and it's about simulators and IFR currency.
I can ask, this poor guy in the middle he's been doing such a good job with his right hand. If you want to talk afterwards, we'll be available.
I got it right
to.
here. Hold on, sir.
Go ahead. Just the look of sadness each time when he put his hand down, crushing.
I'm kind of the sniper in the jungle, left seat 7675 driver. One of the things that flight simulation does, as far as on the PCs, is your situational awareness and also anticipating what's coming up, especially if you're operating in an ATC world like PilotEdge, and learning that, hey, next thing coming up going to be vectors, or you're setting the airplane up to land. You guys really didn't touch on getting ahead of the airplane, which when you're flying, especially on the PCs, anticipate what's coming up, what you need to do next. As a check captain, I see that all the time. Some guys get situated, even in the real world, like going into Kennedy, things like that. The important thing is understanding what's going on, what's coming up next, because once you get behind the airplane,
it's over.
You're in the swamp and you're bailing.
Yeah, and I would definitely put that in the 75% category. That's definitely one of the things the simulator is great at doing. You guys have
All
any
right.
more?
Yeah, I'm new to simulation, but I've been a pilot forever, and I know the FAA has recently allowed us to use some type of flight simulator to stay IFR current. Is there anything that we can do at home, or is there anything coming that we can do at home to use that technology?
What qualifies as an AATD? 'Cause
That's
you
a good
can use those at home.
You could go with BATD. If you have the idea that you could take your PC at home and add some hardware to it, and now you can shoot approaches with it and stay current, that's not how it's going to work. You need to get an approved device. The price tag on those approved devices is significant. You'd have to look at, okay, let's say it costs me $12,000 to acquire a BATD that is of actually, frankly, a lower quality in terms of the experience that it delivers compared to a $2,500 PC at home. Okay, I'm spending all of this money. What is it actually getting me? Okay, it's saving me doing 6 approaches every 6 months. Okay, that's like 7 years of currency that this is costing me right here in this one-time purchase. So it's going to take 7 years. I'm using that number randomly, but you get the idea. If the break-even time is so far out in the future, just go do the approaches in the airplane. Even if it's the same 6 approaches, that's what I do at this point. I shoot 6 approaches that are the same approaches. I do it the wrong way. It has almost no training value. I shoot 6 ILSs at one airport, do my hold, and I come back home, and now I'm legally current. Was that the safest thing to do? If that's the only thing I was doing, that would be a disaster. But I'm actually supplementing it with a non-certified sim at home and crushing it, doing 6 or 7 approaches a month that I'm taking really seriously, and it's really diverse and varied. So until the price tag of BATDs come down, I would say I would not, unless you're just flush with money, I'd say it's out of range. Their price is too high.
Yeah, and in case anyone doesn't know, that's Basic Aviation Training Device, right?
Yes.
So that's an FAA acronym for an approved simulator that you can use for currency.
But I think the main point there is how can I quantifiably use it in a way that can go to my logbook. And I think the question that was brought up over here of getting ahead of the airplane is what it, and I guess it was, I'm glad that you specifically used those words. That is kind of what I was talking about falling down the hill of being off board. This is what the sim is good for to me. I don't care about logging it, and I gotta be honest, my logbook's a bit of a mess because of all the things I get to do. I'm not even caught up on what I should be logging probably, but I don't care because what matters to me is what I'm learning and what I'm taking to the next flight. How safe am I? How current am I? How recent am I? I don't, obviously I'm gonna stay current legally, but I feel like the legal minimums are not really safe. So these types of tools that help you learn to stay ahead of the airplane because you're at home, I don't care if I'm not able to log it. What matters is when I get into that airplane the next time, I feel more prepared, and that's what these tools are doing for me, and I'm really excited about it.
I'd like a 10-second follow-up is, if your question is, should I get a certified sim? If the answer is no, then what's the value of the sim if I have access to a real-world airplane? If you have an hour and a half to spare, you cannot do diddly in a real airplane by the time you go door to door. With 90 minutes, I can be productive for 87 of those in the sim. So for that alone, it's a very productive tool.
And I think we all agree on that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Our,
You did good, man.